Every morning at 3:17 a.m., the world was quiet, and the recipe card was warm in his hands. The flour, the sugar, the scent of vanilla, it was the only thing he had left of her. For 5 years, he baked it just once, for his daughter, on her birthday. Until the night a billionaire offered him any price in the world for that cake, and he looked her in the eye and said no. His name was Leo. He ran a small, struggling bakery, a 10-year dream built with his wife, Claire, before cancer took her. Now it was just him and his 6-year-old daughter, Maya, clinging to the one tradition that still felt like home. But on a rainy Tuesday night, that tradition was challenged by a woman with unimaginable resources and a desperate, hidden reason. She didn't just want a cake. She needed the one thing he had sworn never to sell. The bakery, Claire's Hearth, was a narrow slice of a building on a street where rents were climbing faster than the bread. Leo had opened it with Claire 11 years ago, a fusion of her pastry artistry and his stubborn belief that good food required time, not shortcuts. For 5 years, it had been the warm, fragrant heart of their lives. Then came the diagnosis, the 7 brutal months, and the silence that followed. The cancer took Claire 5 years ago, when Maya was just 1. It left Leo with a mountain of medical debt, a business on a financial knife's edge, and a daughter whose only memory of her mother was a scent, a feeling, a story told at bedtime. Leo's world now orbited 2 immutable points. The first was Maya. She was 6, with her mother's riot of dark curls and a solemn, observant nature that made her seem older. The second was the recipe. It wasn't written down in any book. It existed in the muscle memory of Leo's hands, in the specific crack of vanilla bean pods saved for this one purpose, in the precise temperature of butter that Claire had determined through a year of weekly experiments. It was a chocolate orange torta, its surface a mirror of dark glaze, its interior layered with whispers of almond and the faintest brush of sea salt. Claire had called it her sunrise cake because the candied orange peel on top was meant to look like dawn breaking. He baked it exactly once a year, on the eve of Maya's birthday. The ritual was sacred. He would close the bakery early, send his one part-time employee home, and begin alone in the quiet kitchen. He played Claire's favorite music, a faded vinyl record of jazz standards that skipped in the same 2 places. He measured not with scales, but with the old ceramic cups Claire's grandmother had brought from Sicily. The process took 5 hours, and for those 5 hours, she was in the room with him. The scent of melting chocolate and zest was her voice. The feel of the batter was her hand on his. It was their most private conversation, a language spoken in sugar and memory. The rest of the year, he baked for survival. Sourdough loaves that fueled the town's mornings, simple cupcakes for school parties, rugged, buttery scones that were the only reason the local coffee shop stayed in business. The profit margin was thin as parchment. 70% of family businesses fail or are sold before the second generation. Leo felt that statistic like a physical weight on his shoulders every single day. The medical debt was a ghost that never left, a monthly withdrawal that meant some weeks he paid himself last, if at all. He was 34, but his hands told the story of a much longer life, calloused from oven racks, permanently dusted with a fine film of flour, a pale scar across his thumb from a distracted moment with a bread lame 2 winters ago. Maya's birthday was in 8 days. The ingredients for the sunrise cake were already tucked away on the top shelf of the pantry. The special chocolate, the jar of homemade orange marmalade, the vanilla beans like precious, fragrant sticks. Leo had just flipped the closed sign after a slow Tuesday when the bell above the door jangled. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the street outside into a river of reflected neon. A woman stood in the doorway shaking water from a camel hair coat that cost more than his monthly rent. She was in her late 30s, with an intensity in her eyes that had nothing to do with the weather. "I need a cake," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the cooling ovens. "A specific cake for tomorrow night." Leo wiped his hands on his apron, already shaking his head with the polite, tired smile he reserved for last-minute requests. "I'm sorry, we are closed for custom orders. I have a few day-old pastries left, if you're interested." "It's not for me," she said, stepping fully inside. Her heels clicked on the tile floor. "It's for my father. It's his 80th birthday, his last one according to his doctors." She paused, her gaze sweeping the modest shop. "I was told you make a chocolate orange torta, a special one." A cold knot tightened in Leo's stomach. No one knew about that cake. It wasn't on any menu. It had never been for sale. "You're misinformed," he said, his voice firmer now. "I don't sell that cake." "I'll pay you $5,000, she said, as if stating a simple fact. The number hung in the air, absurd and enormous. It was more than he cleared in 2 months. It could cover a debt payment, fix the chronically faulty mixer, buy Maya the winter coat she was outgrowing. He felt the pull of it, a visceral financial gravity. Then he saw Claire's grandmother's cup on the shelf. He saw the ghost of flour on the counter where Maya had helped that morning. "The answer is no," Leo said, crossing his arms. "It's not for sale at any price." The woman didn't blink. She opened her designer bag and pulled out a checkbook. 10,000, right now, you can name the number." "You're not listening," Leo said, a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the ovens. "This isn't a negotiation. That cake, it's for my daughter. It's her birthday tradition. It was her mother's. It's not a product." For the first time, the woman's polished composure fractured, not in anger, but in something raw and desperate. Her shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. She looked at the checkbook in her hands as if it were a useless toy. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, stripped of all its transactional force. "My father," she said, each word measured. "He's not just sick, he's fatting. He hasn't spoken a coherent sentence in 6 months. The doctors say it's a rapid, late-stage dementia." But this morning he woke up. He looked at me clear as anything and he said, "I can smell the orange chocolate cake from the little bakery by the river, the one with the kind girl who smiled." She looked up at Leo, her eyes glistening. "He was describing my mother. She died 15 years ago, and the bakery he's talking about, it burned down when I was a child." Leo stood frozen behind the counter. The rain drummed on the window. The woman took a shaky breath. "He's not asking for a cake," she whispered. "He's asking for a memory I don't have, a memory of her, and I have no way to give it to him, no way except you." The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't the quiet of a refused transaction. It was the quiet of two people standing at the edge of the same canyon of loss, looking across. Leo slowly uncrossed his arms. The defiant heat in his chest cooled into a dull, aching recognition. He knew that look in her eyes, the frantic, loving desperation of someone trying to reach a person who was slipping away. He had worn it himself for 7 months in a hospital room. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer. Evelyn Thorne." The name meant nothing to him, but the weight of it, the way she said it, suggested it meant a great deal elsewhere. "And your father?" Henry Thorne." She saw the lack of recognition on his face and gave a small, humorless smile. "He founded Thorne Biomedical. You wouldn't know him, he made sure of that. He is a very private man." Leo leaned back against the counter, the old wood creaking. The mixer, the debt, the worn floor tiles, all of it receded. Here was a new, impossible equation. A billionaire's daughter, a fadding titan of industry, and a memory of a cake from a bakery that no longer existed. And his cake, Claire's cake, Maya's cake. "The bakery by the river," Leo said. "You're sure it burned down?" "When I was 8, it was called the Gilded Bun. My mother loved it. She'd take me every Saturday. I remember the smell, but I don't remember a chocolate orange cake. I remember cinnamon rolls, apple turnovers." Evelyn's gaze turned inward, searching, but he was so specific. "The kind girl who smiled. That was my mother. She smiled at everyone." A thought, fragile and dangerous, began to form in Leo's mind. "My wife, Claire, she worked in a bakery before we met. When she was in culinary school, she never told me the name. She said it was a sad story, that the place closed in a fire. She lost a mentor there." Evelyn's head snapped up. "How long ago?" 15, maybe 16 years. The color drained from Evelyn's face. "That's the timeline. The fire was 16 years ago this spring." She took a step closer, her plea now sharpened with a terrifying hope. "Leo, please, this can't be a coincidence. Your recipe, could it be from that bakery? Could it be the cake my father remembers my mother loving?" The question struck Leo like a physical blow. Claire had always been secretive about the origins of the sunrise cake. She said she'd perfected it through love, but the base, the architecture of it, had come from someone else. An old baker she'd apprenticed under, a woman she spoke of with reverence and a deep, enduring sadness. She'd never given a name. "I don't know," he said, and it was the truth. The recipe was so deeply woven into his memory of Clea that its origins felt mythical, pre-existing, like a folk song passed down. To think it had a concrete history, a specific bakery, other people who loved it, it changed its nature. It wasn't just theirs anymore. It was a relic, a thread connecting disparate lives shattered by the same tragedy. "Will you find out?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not asking for the cake yet. I'm asking, will you help me know if this is real, for him, for the few clear moments he has left?" Leo looked past her, out the rain-streaked window to the dark street. He thought of Maya, asleep at his brother's apartment. He thought of the promise he'd made to himself at Clea's grave, to protect their world, their rituals, to keep her alive for their daughter in the ways he could. Letting this stranger in felt like a violation of that promise, but refusing her now felt like a different kind of betrayal, a betrayal of the very empathy Clea had poured into every plate she'd ever served. "Come back tomorrow," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. "After closing, I'll see what I can remember." The gratitude that flooded Evelyn's face was so profound, it was almost painful to witness. She didn't offer money again. She just nodded, a single sharp movement, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Thank you," she said, and then she was gone, swallowed by the rain. Leo didn't move for a long time. The shop felt cavernous, haunted by the echo of her story. He walked to the pantry and took down the jar of orange marmalade Clea had made in their first autumn together. The label was in her handwriting, now faded. He ran his thumb over it. "Sunshine in a jar, asterisk," it said. He spent the night in the small office, surrounded by the ghost of Clea's presence. He pulled out old photo albums from the early days before Maya. There was a picture of Clea, younger, her hair in a messy bun, laughing in a kitchen that wasn't theirs. In the background, blurred, was a tiled wall with a distinctive pattern of blue and white diamonds. He never asked where it was. It was just her old kitchen. He searched through her small box of keepsakes, concert tickets, dried flowers, a broken bracelet. At the bottom, folded inside a book of poetry, he found a singed and water-stained index card. His breath caught. The handwriting was not Clea's. It was an elegant, sloping script, faded with time and damage. The heading read, "Gâteau à l'orange fondant asterisk." The ingredients were a skeleton of what the cake would become: bitter chocolate, Seville oranges, almond flour. At the bottom, in the same hand, was written, "For E, who understands that joy is a serious ingredient. G. E. Evelyn's mother, G. the mentor, the baker who died in the fire." Leo's hands trembled. Here was the proof, tangible and tragic. The recipe was a legacy. It had survived a fire. It had been carried in Clea's heart, then in his, and now it lived in Maya's memory. And it was the last coherent request of a dying man who remembered the woman he loved through its scent. The next day passed in a blur. Leo moved through his baking routines mechanically. Every customer seemed to speak from a distance. His part-time employee, a college student named Chloe, asked him twice if he was feeling okay. All he could think about was the card in his pocket and the appointment looming at the end of the day. Evelyn returned just after 6 p.m. as promised. She looked like she hadn't slept. Without a word, Leo placed the singed index card on the counter between them. He watched as she picked it up, her eyes scanning the handwriting. When she saw the dedication for E**, a small broken sound escaped her. She turned the card over. On the back, in a different ink, was a tiny stamped logo, a stylized golden bun. "The gilded bun," she confirmed, her voice thick. She looked at Leo, her eyes wide with a sorrow that had decades in it. "My mother's name was Ilara. Everyone called her El, for E**. The baker's name was Giselle," Leo said quietly, repeating what Clea had told him in fragments. "Clea called her a genius. She said the fire, it took her and all her recipes. Clea only saved this one because she'd taken it home to practice that weekend." Evelyn placed the card down with immense care as if it were a holy relic. "So it's real. The cake my father remembers, it's this cake. The one your wife learned to make, the one you make for your daughter." She met his gaze. "Leo, I need to ask you again, not as a transaction, as a humanitarian act, a piece of living history. Will you bake it for him? I will respect any condition, any price, even if that price is nothing. But please, give him this memory back." The moral ground had shifted beneath Leo's feet. It was no longer about selling a family secret. It was about completing a circle that had been broken by fire and death. It was about a daughter, years later, trying to gift her father a moment of peace with the ghost of his wife. How could he, of all people, deny that? But then he saw Maya's face in his mind. Her excitement for asterisk her cake, for asterisk their asterisk day. The one day a year the ghost of her mother felt closest. If he baked the cake for Henry Thorne, it would break their ritual. The first time the sunrise cake was made for someone else would also be the first time it wasn't made for her. He would be sharing her mother with a stranger. "I have to talk to my daughter," Leo said, the words tasting like ash. "It's a cake too. I won't decide this without her." Evelyn nodded, respect and desperate hope warring in her expression. Of course, when? Tonight now, he needed to resolve this. The suspense was a weight he couldn't carry. "Come with me." He led her out the back, locking the bakery behind them. They drove in his old, flour-dusted sedan across town to his brother's modest duplex. The rain had softened to a drizzle. Leo's brother, Ben, answered the door, his expression shifting from surprise to open curiosity at the well-dressed woman behind Leo. "Is Maya awake?" Leo asked. "Just barely. We're finishing up the Hobbit asterisk. Again." Ben stepped aside, his eyes asking silent questions Leo couldn't answer yet. Maya was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes glued to the television. When she saw her father, she grinned. Then she saw Evelyn, and the grin softened into a look of shy assessment. "Hey, Bug," Leo said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I need to talk to you about something really important. This is Evelyn." Evelyn gave a small, gentle wave. "Hello, Maya." Maya sat up, pulling the blanket to her chin. "Is she the cake lady?" Leo blinked. "How did you know?" "Ben said a fancy lady came to the bakery last night, and Daddy got all quiet after." Maya's perceptiveness, as always, was disarming. Leo took a breath. "She is, and she has a very sad, very important story about her daddy who is very sick and who remembers a cake that sounds a lot like Mommy's sunrise cake." He explained it in the simplest terms he could. The old bakery, the fire, the memory, the singed card. Maya listened with the intense focus of a child following a fairy tale. When he finished, she was quiet for a full minute, her small brow furrowed. "So, the cake is from that other bakery first, before it was Mommy?" "Yes, Mommy learned it from a very nice baker there. And that baker was the sick daddy's friend." The baker was his wife's friend. The sick daddy's wife loved the cake. Maya absorbed this, connecting the dots in her mind. "So, if you make the cake for him, it would be like his wife is saying hello to him again." Leo felt a lump rise in his throat. "Something like that, yes." Maya looked down at her hands, then at Evelyn, who was kneeling now to be at her level, her eyes full of silent tears. Maya's next question was directed at Evelyn. "Does your daddy miss his wife as much as my daddy misses my mommy?" Evelyn's composure finally cracked. A single tear traced down her cheek. "Yes, sweetheart, I think he does, every single day." Maya nodded as if this was the only data point she needed. She turned back to Leo, her expression solemn, decisive. "Then we have to make it for him. Mommy would want us to. She was always sharing." The simplicity of her moral calculus shattered Leo's resistance. He pulled her into a tight hug, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, feeling the fierce, small beat of her heart against his. "You're sure?" he whispered. "Yes, but," she pulled back, her face serious. "We have to make mine too, on my birthday, and you have to tell me the whole story about the other bakery when we do it." "Deal," Leo said, his own eyes stinging. He looked at Evelyn over Maya's head and gave a single, slow nod. It was yes. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders trembling with relief. But as they drove Evelyn back to her sleek car parked behind the bakery, a new practical dread began to dawn on Leo. He had agreed, but the logistics were a nightmare. Henry Thorne's birthday was tomorrow night. Maya's was in a week. He had to source perfect ingredients for 2 cakes in rapid succession, while also running the bakery alone. He had to perform a sacred, emotional ritual twice, for 2 different reasons, under immense pressure. And as Evelyn thanked him profusely, promising to send a car for the cake tomorrow evening, Leo realized the final, crushing complication. He had just promised to recreate a memory for one of the wealthiest, most powerful families in the state. What if it failed? What if the cake, born of love and grief in his quiet kitchen, didn't live up to a billionaire's decades-old dream? The stakes were no longer just emotional. They were about to become very, very public. The weight of that yes settled on Leo like a physical yoke. He had 24 hours. The next day was a frantic ballet of precision and panic. He called Chloe and begged her to open the bakery and handle the day's routine bakes, the bread, the scones, the simple orders. He promised double pay. For himself, he embarked on a high-stakes scavenger hunt. The specific bitter chocolate Claire had used was from a small Belgian importer who only shipped quarterly. Leo drove 40 miles to a specialty warehouse in the city, pleading his case to a skeptical manager until a phone call, arranged by a discreet Evelyn Thorne, secured him the last 2 bars in the state. The Seville oranges were out of season. He found a jar of preserved peel in the back of his own pantry, put up by Claire in what he now realized was the last autumn of her life. The vanilla beans were precious, but they were there. The almond flour was fresh. Every ingredient felt like a piece of evidence in an emotional trial. He began at 3 in the afternoon, alone in the bakery kitchen. He followed the ritual, Claire's jazz record spinning, the ceramic cups, the slow melt of chocolate in a double boiler, but the atmosphere was different. The quiet was charged with anxiety, not reverence. His hands, usually steady, trembled as he zested an orange. This wasn't for Maya. This was for a stranger, a titan, a ghost. He was baking for a panel of judges he would never meet. A dying man's memory, a dead woman's palate, a billionaire daughter's hope. Halfway through, disaster struck. As he folded the egg whites into the dense chocolate base, his elbow jostled the bowl. A cascade of batter, precious and irreplaceable, slopped over the side and onto the floor. Leo stared at the mess, his heart hammering against his ribs. There wasn't enough chocolate to start over. There wasn't enough time. For a terrifying minute, he was paralyzed, seeing not just spilled batter, but the collapse of his promise, Evelyn's hope, Henry Thorne's last coherent wish. Then he took a breath. He channeled Claire's calm. She had always said baking was about problem-solving, not perfection. He salvaged what was left in the bowl, adjusted the remaining dry ingredients by instinct and feel, and prayed. The cake layers that emerged from the oven were slightly thinner than usual, but their scent, the deep, complex perfume of orange and dark chocolate, was unmistakably, miraculously right. The glaze was the final hurdle, a tricky concoction that had to set to a perfect, glossy mirror. As he poured it, his phone buzzed repeatedly on the counter. Ignoring it, he focused on the slow, even coating. When he finally looked, the screen showed 7 missed calls from Ben and 3 from a number he didn't recognize. A text from Ben blinked, "Call ME, now." A cold dread, separate from the cake anxiety, gripped him. He called his brother. "Leo, where have you been?" Ben's voice was tight, urgent. "I'm finishing the cake. What's wrong? Is Maya okay?" "Maya's fine, she's with me. It's other stuff. Have you seen the news, the local business blog?" "No, why?" Ben exhaled heavily. Someone leaked it. The whole story. Reclusive billionaire's dying wish fulfilled by struggling local baker. There's a photo of Evelyn Thorne leaving your bakery last night. They've dug up the whole history, the gilded bun fire, your wife's connection, everything. They're calling it a modern fairy tale. Leo's knees felt weak. He leaned against the work table. Who? Who knows? A customer? Someone at the specialty warehouse? It doesn't matter. The point is, it's out. And the comments, Leo, they're not all nice. Some people are saying you're exploiting a sick old man for PR. Others are saying the Thornes are exploiting *U for a cheap, heartwarming story. There's a TV van parked down the street from my place. The world, which had shrunk to the dimensions of his kitchen, violently expanded. His private act of compassion was now public fodder. The narrative was being written without him, and it was ugly. He finished the cake in a daze, decorating it with the signature candied orange peel sunrise. It was beautiful. It was the most emotionally fraught object he had ever created. At 6:30, a silent, black town car pulled up to the back alley. A uniformed driver got out. Leo handed over the cake box, secured in a custom carrier Evelyn had provided. He gave strict, nervous instructions about keeping it level. As the car pulled away, carrying a piece of his heart and Claire's legacy into the night, he felt utterly hollow. The fallout was immediate. The next morning, his bakery was besieged. It wasn't just the local TV station. National lifestyle reporters, food bloggers, and curious onlookers formed a crowd outside Claire's hearth. Chloe called in, too anxious to face the scrum. Leo, running on 2 hours of sleep, opened the doors out of sheer stubborn habit. The bell didn't stop jangling. Most people didn't want bread. They wanted the story. They wanted to see the miracle baker. They took photos of his worn apron, of Maya's drawings on the wall. A woman asked if he would autograph a muffin. Amid the chaos, a stern-faced man in a sharp suit approached the counter. He was not a reporter. "Mr. Costa, I'm Robert Alden, legal counsel for the Thorne family." He slid a business card across the counter. The card felt expensive. "Ms. Thorne has asked me to convey her profound gratitude. The cake was a success, beyond expectations." Leo nodded, waiting for the but. "However, given the unforeseen media attention, we need to discuss matters of intellectual property and liability." The words were cold water. Intellectual property. The recipe, the sunrise cake. While we understand it has sentimental value to you, its origins, as we've discovered, lie with the late Giselle Vauquelin, proprietor of the Gilded Bun. The Thorne family has retained investigators who have located Ms. Vauquelin's sole surviving heir, a nephew in Quebec. The recipe, technically, is his intellectual property. Leo felt the floor tilt. "I'm not selling it. I made one cake as a favor." "Of course, but the publicity has created value. There are already inquiries, bloggers wanting to publish the recipe, food networks interested in segments. To protect all parties, including the moral rights of the original creator, Ms. Thorne proposes a formal nominal licensing agreement. $1. It would formally acknowledge the chain of ownership and allow you to continue your personal use while preventing commercial exploitation by others. It was a velvet-gloved legal maneuver, a way to control the narrative, to box the genie back into a bottle, to remind him that even in a fairy tale, billionaires have lawyers. Leo's grief and goodwill curdled into something hard and defensive. "So, I need your permission to keep making my daughter's birthday cake." "It's a formality, a protection for you as well," Alden said smoothly. "Signing it also comes with a gesture of thanks, a cleared debt." He placed a second document on the counter. It was a statement from the medical billing agency. The balance was zero, a six-figure ghost exorcised with a stroke of a pen. The offer was astronomical. It was freedom. It was also a cage. Accepting it meant admitting the recipe was never fully his or Claire's. It meant being forever tied to the Thorne family's machinery. Refusing it meant keeping his pride, but also the crushing debt and potentially a legal fight he couldn't afford. "I need to think," Leo said, his voice rough. "Naturally, the offer stands for 48 hours. Alden gave a curt nod and left, parting the crowd of onlookers like a ship through waves. Leo closed the bakery early, putting a sign on the door that read "Family Emergency." He drove to Ben's, avoiding his own home. He needed silence. He needed to talk to Maya. But when he arrived, Ben met him at the door with a tablet, his face grim. "It gets worse," Ben said. "Before you talk to Maya, you need to see this." On the screen was a popular gossip and business news site. The headline was brutal: "Dying wish or PR stunt? Questions surround Thorne family's heartwarming bakery tale." The article cited anonymous sources close to the family, suggesting that Henry Thorne's lucid moment had been exaggerated, that the entire event was a strategically leaked sympathy play to bolster the family's image ahead of a difficult shareholder meeting. It painted Leo as either a naive pawn or a willing participant in a cynical marketing campaign. The world spun. The beautiful, painful truth of the past few days, the shared loss, the historical connection, Maya's generosity, was being rewritten as a cheap, calculated fraud. His integrity, Claire's memory, Maya's kindness, were all being smeared as props in a billionaire's game. Just then his phone rang. It was Evelyn. Her voice, usually composed, was frantic. "Leo, have you seen the reports? I'm so sorry, those sources are lying. My father's moment was real. This leak, this spin, it's from my cousin. He's on the board. He's been trying to force a sale of the company and our family. Emotional volatility is his ammunition. I didn't see this coming, I swear to you. Her explanation made a terrible kind of sense. He was caught in a corporate civil war, his bakery a tiny pawn on a massive board. The fairy tale was now a thriller. The lawyer came, Leo said flatly, with the offer and the debt clearance. Evelyn was silent for a moment. I wanted to thank you properly without it seeming like a transaction, but after this, I understand if you never want to hear from us again, you can tear up the offer. The debt is cleared regardless. Consider it damages. It was a stunning move, a millionaire's apology. It left him debt-free, but adrift in a sea of public suspicion. He ended the call more confused than ever. He finally sat with Maya, who had been watching children's television in the other room. He tried to explain the situation in simple terms, that some people were saying mean things about the nice cake they made for the sick man. Maya listened, then asked, "Did the sick man like the cake?" "I think so, yes." "And did it make him remember his wife?" "According to his daughter, it did." Maya nodded, satisfied. "Then the mean people are wrong, we did a good thing." Her clarity was an anchor in the churning sea, but it couldn't stop the storm. The next 48 hours were a hellscape of noise. He refused all interviews. The licensing agreement sat unsigned on his counter at home, next to the zero-balance medical statement. He was free, but he felt shackled by perception. The bakery's regular customers were supportive, but the gawkers and cynics still loitered. His story was everywhere, and he had lost all control of it. On the eve of Maya's birthday, exhaustion and defeat threatened to swallow him whole. The act of baking her cake, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a minefield. Could he even do it without thinking of the legal threats, the tabloid headlines, the cynical sneers? He stood in his dark, empty bakery at midnight. The ingredients for Maya's sunrise cake were laid out. The jazz record was on the turntable, but he couldn't move. He was frozen at the intersection of memory and scandal, love and litigation. He had set out to protect a tradition and had instead nearly broken it. He picked up the singed recipe card, then the legal agreement. He looked from one to the other. One was an artifact of love, survived by fire. The other was a document of control, written in boardrooms. He had to choose which world he lived in. And as the clock ticked toward 1 a.m., he made his decision. He picked up his phone. He wasn't calling his brother or a lawyer. He was calling Evelyn Thorne. He had one question, the answer to which would change everything. Evelyn Thorne answered on the second ring, her voice strained with sleeplessness and apology. "Leo, I'm so sorry about the news, the lawyers, all of it. Please believe." He cut her off, his voice calm but firm in the quiet bakery. "I have one question. When your father tasted the cake, what did he say?" The line was silent for a moment, save for the faint sound of her breathing. When she spoke again, the corporate heiress was gone, replaced by a grieving daughter. He took a bite. He closed his eyes. He said, "There she is." Then he smiled, a real smile, Leo. He hasn't smiled like that in years. He held my hand and he said, "Thank you for finding her." Her voice broke. He thought the cake was asterisk her. For a moment in his mind, she was back. Leo closed his own eyes. In that statement, all the noise, the lawyers, the blogs, the cynical cousins fell away. The core truth was irreducible and beautiful. A man at the end of his life had been visited by the ghost of his greatest love, conjured by taste and memory. Leo had been the conduit. That was the story. That was the only story that mattered. "Okay," Leo said. "Thank you." "What are you going to do?" Evelyn asked. "What I promised my daughter I'd do," he said. "I'm going to bake her birthday cake." He hung up. He picked up the legal agreement from the counter. He didn't tear it up. Instead, he took a pen and wrote across the top in clear, bold letters, "DCLNED, the recipe is not a commodity, it is a memory." He signed his name, took a photo, and emailed it to Robert Alden, the lawyer. Then he texted the same photo to Evelyn with a single message. "The debt was a kind gesture, thank you, but we're even." He placed the document in the drawer. Then he turned back to his kitchen. He put the needle on Claire's record. The familiar, skipping jazz filled the space. He picked up Claire's grandmother's ceramic cup, and he began. This time the ritual was not fraught. It was defiant. Every measured ingredient was a reclamation. Every step was an act of love, deliberately separated from the world of deals and headlines. He baked for Maya. He baked for Clea. He baked for Giselle, the baker lost to the fire. He baked for Henry Thorne and his Ilara. He baked for the unbroken chain of love that a simple recipe could carry across decades and through tragedy. The cake that emerged was perfect. The next morning, on Maya's birthday, the crowd outside had diminished but not disappeared. Leo did something he never did. He opened the bakery on a Wednesday, Maya's birthday, which he always treated as a holiday. He flipped the sign to open and propped the front door wide. He and Maya carried the sunrise cake, radiant on a simple stand, and placed it in the center of the largest table. Then Leo brought out a stack of plates and a pile of forks. He stepped outside. The reporters and onlookers stirred. He didn't address the cameras. He looked at the people, some curious, some skeptical, some genuinely moved. "My daughter is 7 today," he said, his voice carrying in the morning quiet. "This cake was her mother's. It's her favorite thing in the world. Today we're not selling anything. We are sharing. If you'd like to come in and have a piece to celebrate with us, you're welcome. No questions, no stories, just cake." He went back inside. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then an elderly woman from down the street, a regular who bought his sourdough every Saturday, walked in. She smiled at Maya, wished her a happy birthday, and took a slice. Then a young couple, looking unsure, followed. Then a few more. The TV crew lingered outside, unsure how to film a story that had just refused to be a spectacle. Soon, the small bakery was full of people, quietly eating cake. There was no press conference. There was just the communal, humbling act of sharing something precious. The critics and the cynics stayed outside, their narratives powerless against the simple, sugary reality happening within. Halfway through the morning, a sleek car pulled up. Evelyn Thorne got out alone. She walked past the cameras, her head high, and entered the bakery. The room quietened. She went straight to Maya, who was beaming behind the cake. "Happy birthday, Maya," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "Did your daddy really like it?" Maya asked. "He loved it," Evelyn said, her eyes shining. "He asked me to tell you thank you." She then turned to Leo. "He passed away last night, peacefully, in his sleep." She swallowed. "Your cake was the last truly good thing he experienced. On behalf of my father and my mother, thank you." She didn't stay for cake. She had given her message, the most important one. She left as quietly as she had come. The news of Henry Thorne's passing would hit the wires within the hour, transforming the cynical, PR stunt narrative into a poignant final chapter. But in that moment, in the bakery, it was just a private acknowledgement between people who understood loss. The day ended with just Leo and Maya, finally alone, eating the last slices of cake at their kitchen table at home. It was, Maya declared, the best one ever. The aftermath was a quiet settling. The media circus, having gotten its bittersweet ending with Henry Thorne's death, moved on. The licensing offer was never mentioned again. The medical debt remained cleared. Leo sent a small, discreet package to Evelyn a week later. It contained the original singed recipe card and a beautifully transcribed copy in Clea's handwriting. A note read, "For your family archives, the original should be with you." Evelyn's thank you note came on simple stationery. Enclosed was a photograph, black and white, of a young, smiling Ilara Thorne standing in front of the gilded bun, her arm linked with a beaming, flower-dusted woman, Giselle. On the back, in elegant script, it said, "The kind girl who smiled, and her friend, thank you for connecting us all." Life at Clea's hearth normalized, but it was a new normal. The notoriety had brought a steady stream of loyal customers who came for the story but stayed for the bread. The financial pressure eased. Leo hired Chloe for more hours. He even started developing a new pastry, something entirely his own. A year later, almost to the day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the bakery. It was from a law firm in Montreal. Inside was a letter from Giselle Vauquelin's nephew, Jean. He wrote that after the death of Henry Thorne, Evelyn Thorne had tracked him down and shared the full story. He had been moved and had done his own research into his aunt's legacy. Enclosed was a formal, notarized document. It granted Leo Costa, in perpetuity, the full and exclusive rights to the recipe known as Gâteau à l'Orange Fondant, or the Sunrise Cake, for personal and commercial use. It was a gift, he wrote, for keeping his aunt's magic alive when the world thought it had been lost to fire. There was no dollar amount. It was a passing of the torch. Leo framed the letter and hung it behind the counter, next to Maya's drawings. He never added the sunrise cake to the menu. But every year, on Maya's birthday, the bakery closes early. The jazz record plays. And for those few hours, the smell of chocolate and orange fills the air, a private monument to love, memory, and the unquantifiable value of the things we refuse to sell. The final surprise came on Maya's 8th birthday. As Leo was cleaning up after their private celebration, Maya tugged on his apron. "Daddy, I think we should make a small one for the shop, not the big one, a little one, just for one person, and we should call it the Ilara, for the kind lady who smiled." Leo looked at his daughter, her face serious with the weight of her idea. She was offering to share the tradition, not break it, to create a new, generous offshoot of the old tree. He knelt and pulled her into a hug. "That," he whispered into her hair, "is a perfect idea." And so, the following week, a small, elegant placard appeared in the bakery case beside a single, exquisite slice of chocolate orange torta. It read, "The Ilara, a slice of memory, one per day while it lasts." It sold out within minutes every morning. The proceeds, as a small sign beside the register explained, went to a local hospice charity. The cycle was complete. A recipe born in one act of love, preserved through grief, had been passed through fire, loss, and legal battles, to finally become an engine of quiet, daily kindness. The story of the cake that couldn't be bought had, in the end, taught everyone its true value. It was never in the price, it was in the passing. So the cake that couldn't be bought found its value not in a sale, but in a story. A story that stretched from a bakery lost to fire, to a widow's kitchen, to a billionaire's final wish, and back to a little girl's birthday table. It proved a quiet, radical idea. In a world fixated on monetizing everything, the most precious things are often those we deliberately keep out of the marketplace. We began with a simple refusal, a man saying no to any price. But that no wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a much deeper yes. A yes to history, to empathy, to the understanding that our most personal treasures, our family recipes, our heirlooms, our rituals, are connective tissue. They are how we ferry love across the river of time, from one generation to the next, from one broken heart to another. The research tells us that 70% of family businesses fail before the second generation. It tells us that scent is the sense most tightly bound to memory. It tells us that cooking can be a profound act of grief therapy. Leo's story is a living testament to all of that. He wasn't just protecting a recipe. He was protecting a portal, a sensory bridge to a lost wife, a lost mother, a lost love. When he finally chose to share it, he wasn't selling a product. He was completing a circuit of memory that had been shorted by tragedy. This is the ultimate tension the story explores, not between rich and poor, but between value and price, between what can be appraised and what can only be felt. A stack of handwritten recipe cards can mean more than a diamond necklace because its worth is measured in love and memory, not carrots and cash. The billion-dollar offer wasn't refused because the cake was worthless. It was refused because it was literally priceless. Its value was inextricable from the hands that made it and the hearts it was meant for. So what's the takeaway? It's an invitation to audit your own life. What is your sunrise cake? What is that one thing, a recipe, a photograph, a faded piece of furniture, a family story told at holidays that you would never sell because to put a price on it would be to misunderstand its fundamental nature? That thing is not an asset. It is a landmark in the map of who you are. It's a piece of your identity, inherited and protected, waiting to be passed on. Leo, Maya, Evelyn, and even Henry Thorne, in his final clarity, remind us that we are not just consumers or producers. We are custodians. We are storytellers. Our most important job is to safeguard the fragile, beautiful, intangible things that no ledger can ever capture, and to have the courage, occasionally, to share them in the right way, for the right reasons. The cake is still baked every year. The ritual holds. But now, a single slice is set aside each day, named for a kind woman who smiled. A small daily act of remembrance that funds kindness for others. The legacy, having survived fire, grief, and lawyers, continues, not as a secret, but as a quiet, ongoing lesson in what truly matters. Thanks for watching. If you found value in this story of intangible worth, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden heart of the things we cherish.